Welcome back. I've got Dr. Somik Raha on the line. Doctor, how are you?
Great, thank you. How are you?
Really, I am awesome. Thank you for asking. Really looking forward to this conversation. You've done some really interesting and amazing things. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into the conversation.
So, yeah, I have been researching values. So, I'm in the field of decision analysis, and this is a field which studies how to make better decisions, how to help people make better decisions. And in the course of that work, I got stuck at a point because a lot of people, in a broad industry where we are optimizing things, we're all optimizing value. And I got stuck with the fundamental question, what does value really mean? And before we jump to measure it, how do we know that our values are represented in what we're optimizing? That became my research, and that also became the fodder for my book, Invaluable: Achieving Clarity on Value.
We definitely want to spend some time talking about the book, but just doing the research and reviewing the book and everything else. Like I said, you've had an interesting journey, from Japan to Stanford, and there's all kinds of twists and turns, which I always feel, especially when I talk with people that have had journeys like that, where you've been in some extremely diverse locales and did work all around the globe. It gives you different insights and perspectives on things. And I love, how your research is on what value is, because value is a word that people throw around. It's probably on posters in boardrooms and all of that. But if you ask 10 people what their definition of value is, you might get a couple dozen different answers. So the research that you've done, and you shared this a bit, but really want to dive into it a little bit more. Is like when you first started entering down this path to really get a better understanding of what value is, what were some of the early findings that may have surprised you?
Well, the starting point of this was that my professor, my PhD advisor, Professor Ron Howard, he was a legend in the field, and he just only recently passed away last year. He he had a professor when he was at MIT 50 years back who passed through for just one semester, and this gentleman had dedicated his life to thinking about values, and he had fled Nazi Germany. This gentleman, his name was Robert Hartman, and he wanted to create a mathematics of value by which no one would make the same kind of mistakes as in that era. And that became a very big foundation for my work. So that was a pretty big surprising thing, that you could create a principled framework to query. And by query, I mean, when you talk to somebody and they tell you, I value XYZ, and whatever they've said makes you deeply uncomfortable, you really have two options. One is you ignore because you're being paid to help them, and you somehow make your peace and work with it, or you say, this is not for me, I can't engage with this. But there isn't a principled mechanism, a non-judgmental mechanism to say, well, let's see, would you agree with this framework? And if you agree with this framework, here the implications are that you're being inconsistent with this. So that's what Hartman had done. And the framework was very simple. It's basically the three dimensions of value. Intrinsic values are defined as life itself. They are an end in itself. They need no justification. Extrinsic values are things that have a physical space-time reality, and they are a means to an end. And systemic values are completely artificial. They don't exist, like rules, mathematics, numbers. These are all systemic values, and they are completely objective. And you could also experience these in interesting ways. Like you could experience these as a part of yourself. That's an intrinsic valuation, a part of your identity. You could experience these separate from yourself. That's extrinsic valuation. And completely objective would be systemic. So now, if you take an example, you say there's a war and 50 people have died in a war, and you might say, oh, that's not a lot. Now, what you've just done is you've taken an intrinsic value, an irreplaceable human life, and reduced it to a single number, and that's a systemic valuation of an intrinsic value. And you could ask yourself, or whoever's saying this, did you mean to do that? You could also flip it and say, well, a lot of people say things like, the promotion is a part of my identity. I need that promotion. Now, promotion doesn't really exist. It's a construct we've created. So it's a systemic value by definition. But when I value this as a part of my identity, I put an intrinsic valuation on it. And then you can say, did you mean to be doing that? Without judging it. And this gives us a way to course correct if we agree with these principles, these axioms.
And I love that. And it helps us actually take a pause and go, all right, what did I actually mean that in how I presented it, or is that how I actually feel? Where like the loss of life, one is too many, 50 is, and again, in a grand scheme of things, people could argue, well, during World War II, millions died, where 50 is not that, and like, what scares me about that is when we diminish the loss of life. And we do it all the time. And again, in many cases, it's not necessarily intentional, but it's a way of kind of maybe numbing the pain a little bit or just trying to like diminish it a bit. And that's, really, really alarming. And I think society needs to wake up a little bit more to that because if we were a little more in tune and did everything we possibly could to prevent any unnecessary loss of life, I think the world would be a whole lot better place. And one other thing I want to ask you too is in reviewing the book and researching and all that, you had phrase that you've said, and it's called about you've been plucked from the cave many times, and I was curious about that. I'm like, okay, I'm assuming you haven't always lived in a cave, but I don't know. But I'm curious what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's an interesting phrase. So it's comfortable to be in a philosophical cave and not have to interact with the world. But then you quickly find out that if you're in the world of doing, you have to connect it to something practical. So that integration is where it's very interesting. And you'll find that whatever we're doing in our work, in our daily work with metrics, most of us don't take the time to appreciate where these fantastic constructs come from. For instance, the number zero, which is at the heart of any accounting we do and any kind of computer science, basically, is zeros and ones. But this number zero doesn't come from Rome. Roman numerals, as you know, were bulky. They suffered a lot with large numbers. Addition was a torture. And so this really came from the fertile plains of India. They had seven rivers, so they had enough food to think about life and philosophy. And there's a poem in ancient Indian texts, which basically goes like this: From wholeness comes wholeness. When you take wholeness away from wholeness, what remains is wholeness. And if you think about it, every culture in the world has represented the idea of wholeness with a circle. And the circle is also the symbol of nothingness. And so you can take that same poem and say, hey, from nothing comes nothing, which is the basis for physics. And when you take nothing away from nothing, or zero minus zero, what remains is nothing. And that's the world's first equation around zero, expressed in poetry. And it was being expressed with feelings, this feeling of wholeness. So, this idea of philosophy and practical reality are not separate, they're integrated. But we've not really had those eyes to see it when we were taught this in maybe middle school. We didn't stop to think about it. And here's the other fascinating part. When you take the number zero and you just think about it, it's the sum of every number you can imagine, positive and negative. If you leave a single number out, you cannot get a zero. Now, when I ask middle schoolers this, like, hey, so do you think zero is empty or do you think it's full? And they will respond saying, we used to think it was empty, but now we realize it's also full. Now, who came up with this stuff? These are our ancestors, right? And so they were passing on some deep thoughts. And this is the world we're surrounded with. Whenever you go back to your metrics, is there a feeling of wonder and awe that, oh my God, there's something deep going on here with our constructs of materialism that we have not fully appreciated?
Yeah, and being a former accountant, yeah, getting to zero is a good thing, especially if you're working in a nonprofit. That means you've received all the funds and you've spent them all, and you have a balance of zero. That's not in the bank account, of course. I'm talking the financial statement. Balance of zero in the bank account. Yeah, there's another hole there that's called, a whole big problem, but that's a different discussion for another day. So let's segue over to the book, and a few things about it. One, eh, in this world, in the instant gratification of the world, and a few moments ago you mentioned something um, about us, needing to interact with others and whatnot. And during the pandemic, especially the early days of it, most of us were, depending on where you live, but around the world, pretty much it said, please, isolate, and which goes against our human existence, which is why I think there's so many people that are dealing with unaddressed trauma from that experience, and it's carried through with the energy and anger and toss in the economics of the world right now and tariffs and everything else that's going on in the world. It's causing a lot of challenges for a lot of people. But again, one of the things about the book is when a world is really obsessed with outcomes and I want cause and effect kind of thing. Your focus is more on decisions. And could you dive into that a little bit more? Because I think when people look at the decisions instead of the bottom line or the outcome that they want, it it'll get you to where you need to be, but it's really a different approach than what people usually see. So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a very astute observation right there. Um, Decisions are the way in which we have some influence over our world, or at least we like to think that way. And I am heavily borrowing from my discipline of decision analysis. Believe it or not, its foundation is a very, very philosophical principle that you cannot judge the quality of the decision from the quality of the outcome. That one statement has been life changing for anyone who engages with this field. For instance, I remember a person who took the class. This person said that, look, I made a bad decision getting married because I got divorced. And after this person had finished the class, the statement changed to, I made a good decision getting married, and then I made a good decision getting divorced because my state of information had changed. And these are two separate points in time. So a lot of that self judgment drops. So decisions are a very powerful human construct. And in some sense, if you think about it, there is not often a decision to make until we become aware of it. We say, look, here we stand. There is something I can do in this situation. And if I can't, then I just have to work on accepting and making my peace with what is going on. But if I want to make a change, then I have to make a decision. And if I have to make a decision, then how do I know I'm making a good one? And the field of decision analysis gives us the six key requirements of making good decisions, which I cover in my book at one point, which is, do you have an appropriate frame? Are you trying to boil the ocean, or have you landed on something that is reasonable and also inspiring? Then second is, what can you do? What are your alternatives? And people tend to take the first thing that comes to their mind. But if you can lay out very different alternatives, that's a high quality alternative process. Then information, is it relevant to the decision? Is it material? Will it change your mind? If so, do you have that information? And then comes values, which is, who do you want to be in this situation? And if we do not know who we want to be, we can't make a decision. So who we want to be goes into what, how much of that do you want in this space? Are there trade-offs? And then the fifth one is, how do you combine all this together? How do you integrate it with good logic and narrative? And the sixth is commitment to action. We've done all the analysis, but are we taking action? Without action, the decision is really not there. It's just thinking. So these are the six requirements, and they are pretty transformative when you look at any situation to break it down and bring it back together.
When you mentioned the, excuse me, the getting married and getting divorced, are two separate decisions, and both in that particular situation for that individual were right decisions for them, based
Yeah.
on the time and the information. And one of the things that I see a lot, because I work with organizations and individuals that are burned out and stressed and disgruntled at work, and you name it, just not a lot of people that are happy right now. for someone that is in some type of role where they feel stuck or they're not in alignment with work, what are some things that they could do to kind of help them kind of step out of that a little bit, to reframe it, to look at it in a different way? Because again, with your experience and in the book and everything else, you know, one of the things that hammers home, and even going back to the beginning of the discussion about values, is looking at things from a different lens, and especially in your particular situation, if you are someone at work that's, you know, feels left out or misaligned or a variety of different emotions that could be coming into play. What are some things that you suggest that people could do to kind of help them get out of that quote unquote funk and actually return to the better version that they want to be?
So that's the soul of my work. So this is where I took a leap from what Hartman had done and the foundation I had from decision analysis. And this is about how do you discover your values and bring them into your metrics. And this was very important to me in the book because people have, what are the alternatives people have when they're going through the situation you described? They'll go for a meditation retreat, a yoga retreat, or something spiritual. But then you come back from the mountaintop, it's Monday morning, it's the same group of people, and it's the same set of metrics you're held accountable to. And now it feels worse because you probably experienced bliss when you went to the mountaintop. And now that bliss has disappeared completely, it's even worse. You know, there's something different out there. So it was very important to me that whatever wisdom we engage with has to come from materialism, from the tools of materialism and the religion of materialism around us, which is counting. And so how do you count so that you are counted? And there comes two key ideas. One is how do you listen for your values? So it's not the first thing that comes out of our mouth. It's the thing that gives us deep joy. I feel like joy is something we haven't explored as much. What gives you deep satisfaction? There's something about our work that makes me feel so fulfilled, so complete that I also become empty of agendas. So emptiness and fullness, the zero and the everything, they're two sides of the same coin. If I can find what that work is, that's gold. So starting with that. And then once I've found it, it's like, what is it about this that I need to represent with my metrics? So understanding the purpose of metrics is critically important. So for instance, people have different views about metrics. They'll say use metrics to change whatever you're doing. That's one perspective. Another is if you keep using metrics all the time, you lose your soul. But I have a third perspective that sometimes metrics can connect to you to your aliveness. And an example, so my daughter was in a school, in a private school, and they were doing a fundraiser. And in that fundraiser, the parent coordinator calls me and says, "Hey, Somik, it's time for this. We want you to participate because you're part of the community." And I said, "Hey, we've already paid the fees. It's a lot this year. I don't know if I have much more to give." And this person says, "Oh, you got it all wrong. We are not optimizing for how much money we have raised. We are optimizing for community, for percentage participation, meaning that we want 100% of the community to participate. It doesn't matter if you give $10 or $1,000." The moment he said that, it lifted a big rock off my shoulder because like, oh, this is the value of community means something to me. And I ended up giving more than I thought I would. And sure enough, when I'm driving into the school, I see the number 80%, but have contributed. We want to get to 100%. And that metric is very powerful because there are no big people and small people. With the percentage participation metric, everybody is the same. If you mean community, that's the metric to optimize. But if you put it as amount raised, then there are big donors and small donors. So what are the metrics that drive that basically communicate your values without you having to speak about them? And that becomes very powerful. And so thinking about that and thinking about what really animates your work makes a tremendous difference in the workplace. So and getting to your uniqueness, like these are all about the unique community you're in. That's where I would push hard on. Your uniqueness matters. What do you uniquely value, and how do we express that?
When I encounter people, especially authors, for example, and or potential authors, let me correct myself, people that are like I want to write a book. I think I have a story to share, but there's already so many books out there. And I said, yeah, but there's none from you. Your unique perspective and viewpoint is unique to you. You're the only version of you. Yeah, there could be people that kind of rhyme with you a little bit, but they're not you. Your insights, your expertise, your observations, your life experiences, your values, all of those things play a part in whatever you want to write about. So whenever anyone has ever asked me, "Do you think I have a book?" I don't even ask them what the book's about. Like, yes, you should, because if you feel that you have a story to share that can help, even if it's helping one person, the ripple effect of that is gigantic. And your book, amazing. Congratulations again on it. And the work you're
Thank you.
doing is so incredibly important. And I think workplaces and humanity as a whole would be a lot better off if we get a little bit more in tune with what you write about. So I've loved this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
You could write to, well, you could go to invaluablebook.org, and you could also write to query@invaluablebook.org to get in touch if you've read the book, you want to share any thoughts. I'd love to read them.
Hmm.
So that and other social media people can find me. So yeah, I'd love to hear from people who are interested in these topics.
Absolutely. And we'll have all that information in the show notes. So, Doctor, thank you again for your time. And again, thank you for the book and for everything else. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate it.